Now let's talk about the ANC. Before the elections, in an address, you said that the ANC is weaker and more divided than it's ever been. Now that we know the results of the election, which are largely good for the ANC,
absolutely,
do you stand by what you said?
Yes, and I did put the caveat that I still thought they would win an overwhelming majority because there's no party like it in South Africa, and the ANC total as a percentage has barely budged in 20 years. You go back to the 94 election, they got 62 point something. Last week they got 62 point something. They did better in between, but they're back to where they were in 94, under Mandela, interestingly enough. But that doesn't mean that the party is as cohesive, as fresh, as united as it was then. And objectively it isn't. Their biggest single trade union component, NUMSA's, disaffiliated from the ruling party. The ANC leadership has been like a circular firing squad, looking in on itself rather than outside. And between the beginning of this year and election day, we had something like 3,500 service delivery protests, most of them violent, and we had this election result. So I think there's a disconnect between how well the ANC does at the polls and some of the underlying issues. And of course, there's also a lot of policy incoherence. I mean, we don't have joined up policy. We have a good public finance policy. We have quite good restraint at the level of our public spending and on our public indebtedness. But we have a lot of anti-business legislation being rammed through at the same time. We commit to the NDP, and we simultaneously put in a whole lot of laws that undermine the premises of the NDP. So there are a lot of contradictions, and someone, whether it's the president or someone else, needs to join those together and take the country forward, bearing in mind we're at our very, very low rate of growth, about 2% or less for this year, and we have huge unemployment at more than 25% on the low account, and we have a lot of, we have a very, very small tax base of 6 million personal taxpayers, and we have a lot of public disaffection. Now, the other feature of the election results, of course, is that while the ANC did extremely well, and no one can gainsay that, they actually are getting, with every election, fewer and fewer votes. So that if you actually look at the universe of people who could have voted, or didn't register or didn't vote, the figure I saw was only 38% of all eligible voters actually voted for the ANC. But of course, with a low registration and relatively low turnout, you get to a figure of 62. So you've also got to bear in mind that there are a whole lot of people who've opted out of the political process entirely. And I thought one of the standout figures in the run-up to the election was the fact that I think only 23% of the so-called born frees, the 18 and 19-year-olds, had actually even bothered to register to vote, and I guess very few of them in the end voted. Now, if people start opting out of the system completely, then you've got a problem because they don't feel that they are stakeholders. And I think whoever's in charge and whoever ultimately directs these things, not just the government, but all of us, need to give that attention as well. How do we re-engage people in the way they felt engaged and energized in 1994?